The washing machine's violent death rattle echoed through the basement laundry room like the final gasps of some mechanical beast. I stood there, holding a basket of soggy clothes, watching sudsy water cascade across the concrete floor in a spreading pool that reflected the harsh overhead bulbs. The machine shuddered one last time and fell silent, leaving behind only the steady drip of water and the acrid smell of burnt electronics. "Perfect," I muttered, setting the basket down and surveying the disaster. Just absolutely perfect. As if my Monday couldn't get any worse. I'd already been running late for work when I discovered I was completely out of clean shirts, a consequence of my tendency to procrastinate on laundry until I was down to my last pair of underwear. The plan had been simple: throw everything in the washer before heading to the office, then transfer it to the dryer when I got home. Instead, I was standing ankle-deep in soapy water, staring at clothes that were somehow dirtier than when I'd started. The basement laundry room of our building had always been a grim place. Concrete walls painted institutional green, flickering lights that cast sickly shadows, the perpetual smell of detergent mixed with mildew. But at 7 in the morning, with water slowly spreading across the floor and my work clothes floating like casualties of some domestic war, it felt particularly apocalyptic. I pulled out my phone to call my landlord, then remembered he never answered before 9 a.m. The building's emergency maintenance number went straight to voicemail. I was on my own as usual. "Excuse me, is everything okay down here?" I spun around to find a man standing in the doorway, taking in the scene with calm, assessing eyes. He was older than me, maybe early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of weathered handsomeness that spoke of experience and quiet strength. He wore dark jeans and a navy sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders, and he carried his own laundry basket with an ease that suggested this was routine for him. It was Anthony, from 4C. I'd seen him around the building countless times over the past year, in the elevator, checking his mailbox, occasionally passing in the hallways, but we'd never actually spoken. He had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it, moving through the world with a self-contained dignity that I found both intimidating and magnetic. "I'm fine," I said automatically, then gestured at the flooded floor. "Well, relatively speaking." He stepped carefully into the room, avoiding the worst of the water. "What happened?" "The machine died mid-cycle. Violently." I ran a hand through my hair, suddenly aware of how I must look. Rumpled work clothes, frazzled expression, standing in a puddle like some kind of domestic disaster victim. "Machine 3? He asked, nodding toward the offending appliance. "Yeah, you know it well. It's been on its last legs for months. I've been avoiding it." He set his basket on one of the folding tables and moved closer to examine the scene. Looks like the pump finally gave out completely. There was something soothing about his presence, the way he assessed the situation without judgment or panic. While I was internally catastrophizing about ruined clothes and wasted time and yet another small failure in my carefully managed life, he was simply problem-solving. "So my clothes are basically a total loss?" I asked. "Not necessarily." He rolled up his sleeves and waded into the ankle-deep water without hesitation. "If we can get them into a working machine quickly enough, they might be salvageable." "You don't have to. It's no trouble." He was already pulling waterlogged clothes from the broken machine, handling my wet laundry with a matter-of-fact efficiency that somehow didn't feel intrusive. "Besides, I've been there. Lost a week's worth of work clothes to machine 2 about 6 months ago." I watched him work, struck by the casual kindness of the gesture. When was the last time someone had simply stepped in to help me without being asked? When was the last time anyone had paid enough attention to my life to notice I was struggling? "I'm Dylan," I said, feeling like proper introductions were overdue. "Anthony." He smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face, softening the serious lines around his eyes. "I know. I've seen you around." "4th floor, right? The corner unit?" You know where I live? I notice things, he said simply, then seemed to catch himself. I notice people in the building. I'm not some kind of stalker. The slight flush that crept up his neck was endearing, humanizing this man who seemed so composed and self-assured. I didn't think you were, I said. I've noticed you too. Have you? There was something in his tone, surprise maybe, or pleasure, that made me look at him more closely. Hard not to. You have a very distinctive presence. He paused in his rescue mission to glance at me, and for a moment our eyes met across the flooded laundry room. There was something in his gaze that made my breath catch, a spark of interest, of recognition, as if he was seeing me for the first time, despite our many wordless encounters. Distinctive how? He asked. I don't know, I said, suddenly self-conscious. Confident, I guess. Like you know exactly who you are and where you belong. Do I? He turned back to the clothes, but I caught the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That's interesting. I usually feel like I'm just making it up as I go along. The admission surprised me. This man who seemed so together, so grounded in his own skin, felt as uncertain as I did most days. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. Well, you fake it well, I said. Practice. He pulled the last of my clothes from the ruined machine and straightened up, his jeans soaked to the knees. There. Let's get these into machine 1 before they start to smell. We worked together to transfer everything, our movements creating a strange sort of intimacy in the cramped space. He was careful not to invade my personal space, but in the confined area around the washing machines, contact was inevitable. His shoulder brushing mine as he reached for detergent, our hands colliding briefly when we both tried to adjust the water temperature at the same time. Each touch sent a small jolt through me, an awareness that felt both electric and dangerous. I found myself hyper-conscious of his presence, the way he moved with economic grace, the sound of his breathing in the quiet room, the faint scent of his cologne mixed with clean cotton and coffee. There, he said, starting the new cycle. Crisis averted. Thank you, I said, meaning it completely. I really didn't expect... you didn't have to help. I wanted to. The simplicity of his answer caught me off guard. Besides, building solidarity and all that. We're all just trying to get our laundry clean. Building solidarity, I repeated, smiling despite myself. Is that what this is? Among other things. The phrase hung between us, weighted with possibility. Among other things. What other things? I wanted to ask, but didn't quite have the courage. I should probably get upstairs and change, I said instead, glancing at my watch. I'm already late for work. What do you do? Marketing coordinator for a nonprofit downtown. Exciting stuff. Spreadsheets, donor databases, the occasional soul-crushing grant application. He laughed, a rich sound that seemed to fill the small room. Sounds fulfilling. Oh, incredibly. Some days I can barely contain my enthusiasm for data entry and budget projections, but you do it anyway. Bills don't pay themselves, I said with a shrug. What about you? I'm a social worker. Child services, mostly. He began loading his own clothes into machine 2, and I found myself lingering despite my time crunch, reluctant to end this unexpected conversation. So I know something about soul-crushing bureaucracy. That must be hard work. It is. But it matters, you know. Even when it's frustrating, even when the system feels broken, you're still making a difference in people's lives. There was passion in his voice, a sense of purpose that I envied. When was the last time I'd felt that way about anything? When had I stopped believing that work could be more than just a way to pay rent? That's really admirable, I said quietly. What is? Having a job that means something to you. making a difference. He studied my face with those perceptive eyes. Your work doesn't feel meaningful to you? Honestly? Number. Not really. I fell into it after college and just stayed. It's steady, predictable, safe. But not fulfilling. No, not fulfilling. The admission hung between us, more personal than I'd intended to get with a near stranger in a basement laundry room. But something about Anthony invited confidence, made me want to tell him things I rarely said aloud even to myself. What would be fulfilling? He asked. I don't know anymore, I said, surprised by my own honesty. I used to want to be a writer. Fiction, mostly. I had all these stories in my head, characters I was dying to bring to life. But then real life happened. Student loans, rent, the general terror of trying to make a living doing something you love. So you gave up. I got practical. Same thing in the end. His matter-of-fact assessment stung because it was true. I had given up, chosen security over passion, certainty over possibility. And somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself that was the mature, responsible choice. Maybe, I said quietly. It's not too late, you know, to change course. I'm 25. I have responsibilities, commitments. I'm 41, he said. I didn't become a social worker until I was 35. Before that, I was in corporate consulting. Good money, prestigious firm, absolutely miserable every single day. What changed? He was quiet for a moment, considering. I realized I was sleepwalking through my life, going through the motions, collecting paychecks, but not really living, not really contributing anything meaningful to the world. That must have been terrifying. Starting over? Terrifying, he agreed, and liberating. And the best decision I ever made. The washing machine hummed to life, filling the silence between us. I watched him fold his empty laundry basket with the same careful attention he brought to everything else, and found myself wondering what other layers existed beneath his calm exterior. I should really get going, I said finally, though leaving was the last thing I wanted to do. Of course. Your job awaits. The soul-crushing world of non-profit marketing, I confirmed, but I was smiling. Dylan? Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you should write again. The suggestion hit me like a physical force. You don't even know if I'm any good at it. I know you light up when you talk about it, he said simply. That has to count for something. The observation left me speechless. Did I light up? I hadn't realized I was so transparent that my face revealed things I tried to keep hidden. Thank you, I said quietly, for saying that, and for helping with the laundry disaster. Anytime. I started toward the door, then turned back. Anthony? Yeah? I'm glad we finally talked. I've been curious about you for months. Curious how? I don't know. You just seem like someone with stories to tell, someone who's lived. He smiled, that slow, transformative expression that made my chest feel tight. We all have stories, Dylan. Most people just don't take the time to listen. Maybe we should change that. Maybe we should. I climbed the stairs to my apartment in a strange haze, replaying every moment of our conversation. The way he'd stepped in to help without being asked, the casual intimacy of working together in that small space, the way he'd looked at me when I talked about writing, as if he could see something in me that I'd forgotten existed. In my apartment, I changed quickly into clean clothes, trying to process what had just happened. It had been a simple conversation with a neighbor, nothing more. But it felt like something had shifted, some door had opened that I hadn't even realized was closed. I thought about what he'd said, about changing course, about it not being too late to pursue something meaningful, about stories and listening and the way people light up when they talk about things they love. When was the last time someone had paid such careful attention to me? When was the last time anyone had looked past the surface of my carefully managed life to see the dreams I'd buried underneath? The rest of my day at work passed in a fog of distraction. I went through the motions, answered emails, updated spreadsheets, attended meetings where people discussed metrics and objectives with serious faces. But my mind kept drifting back to the laundry room, to Anthony's calm presence and thoughtful questions. I found myself wondering about his life, his apartment, what he did in his free time. Did he read? Cook elaborate meals for himself? Have friends over for dinner parties where they discussed books and politics and meaningful things? By 5 o'clock, I was practically vibrating with anticipation to get home, though I couldn't articulate what I was anticipating. The chance of running into him again? Another conversation? Or just the possibility of existing in the same building as someone who had seen something in me worth encouraging? The elevator was broken, a fairly common occurrence in our aging building, so I took the stairs, climbing past the second floor, then the third. As I reached the fourth floor landing, I heard the familiar sound of keys jingling and turned to see Anthony approaching his door, still in his work clothes but looking somehow more relaxed than he had that morning. "Dylan," he said, seeming genuinely pleased to see me, "how was your day of soul-crushing marketing?" Surprisingly soul-crushing, actually. "Yours?" "The usual bureaucratic nightmares and small victories." He paused with his key halfway to the lock. "Your clothes should be ready for the dryer soon, by the way." "Right. The laundry." I'd been so caught up in thinking about our conversation that I'd almost forgotten the practical reason we'd met. "Thank you again for helping with that. You probably saved me a week of wearing dirty clothes to work." "Happy to help." He hesitated, then said, "Are you hungry?" The question came out of nowhere, catching me completely off guard. "I'm sorry?" "Dinner. I was about to make something. Nothing fancy, just pasta and whatever's in my fridge, but I always end up making too much for one person. You're welcome to join me if you want." My heart did something complicated in my chest. Was he asking me to dinner? As neighbors being neighborly, or as something else entirely? "I wouldn't want to impose," I said automatically. "You wouldn't be imposing." I'd enjoy the company. The admission was simple, honest, and somehow vulnerable. Here was this man who seemed so self-contained, so comfortable in his solitude, confessing that he'd enjoy having me around. "I'd like that," I heard myself saying. "If you're sure it's not any trouble." "No trouble at all." His smile was warm, genuine. "Give me 20 minutes to change out of work clothes, then come on over." 20 minutes. I climbed the single flight to my own apartment and immediately began second-guessing everything. What did you wear to dinner with an attractive older neighbor who had rescued your laundry and made you question your entire life? What did you talk about over pasta when you'd already covered the basics that morning? I settled on dark jeans and a button-down shirt, casual but not sloppy, making an effort without looking like I was trying too hard. I brushed my teeth, ran a hand through my hair, and tried to calm the nervous energy that was making my hands shake slightly. This was just dinner between neighbors. Nothing more, nothing less. The fact that I found Anthony attractive and intriguing and unlike anyone I'd ever met was irrelevant. He was being kind, probably lonely, maybe as starved for human connection as I was. But even as I told myself this, I couldn't shake the memory of the way he'd looked at me that morning, the spark of interest I'd seen in his eyes, or the way my pulse had quickened every time we'd accidentally touched while transferring my clothes. At exactly 20 minutes, I knocked on his door. "Coming!" His voice called from inside, followed by the sound of footsteps. The door opened to reveal Anthony in casual clothes, jeans and a soft gray Henley that hugged his frame in ways that made my mouth go dry. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd just showered, and he smelled like soap and something subtly masculine that made me want to step closer. "Perfect timing," he said, stepping back to let me in. "I just opened a bottle of wine." "I hope you drink red." "I do." I stepped into his apartment and immediately felt like I'd entered a different world, where my place was sparse and functional, the basic furniture that came with the rental, a few personal items scattered around but nothing that really made it mine. His apartment felt lived in, curated, like someone had taken the time to create a space that reflected who they were. Books everywhere, but not in a chaotic way. Carefully arranged on built-in shelves, stacked on side tables, a few lying open as if he'd been reading multiple titles simultaneously. Art on the walls, real art that looked like it had been chosen with care rather than bought in bulk from a furniture store. Plants in the windows, thriving under his attention. A kitchen that showed signs of actual use, with good knives and well-seasoned pans hanging from a rack above the stove. "This is incredible," I said, genuinely awed. "It's like a real home." "As opposed to what?" "As opposed to my place, which looks like a hotel room where someone's been staying too long." He laughed, handing me a glass of wine. "It took me years to get it right." When I first moved in, it was just as sterile as any other apartment. But I realized I was spending so much time here, I might as well make it somewhere I actually wanted to be. "How long have you lived here?" 5 years. I moved in after my divorce was finalized." Divorce. The word hung in the air between us, providing context I hadn't expected. So he'd been married. To a woman, presumably, which complicated the tentative attraction I'd been feeling all day. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "Don't be." It was the right thing for both of us. He moved to the stove, stirring something that smelled like garlic and herbs and pure comfort. We'd grown apart over the years, become different people than we were when we got married. Sometimes love isn't enough if you're not compatible anymore. There was sadness in his voice, but also acceptance. The kind of hard-won wisdom that comes from examining your life honestly and making difficult choices. That must have been hard. It was. But staying would have been harder. He glanced at me over his shoulder. "What about you? Ever been married? Long-term relationships?" "A few relationships," I said carefully. "Nothing that lasted. I'm apparently better at the beginning stages than the long-term commitment part." "What goes wrong?" The question was asked without judgment, just genuine curiosity, but it still made me uncomfortable. What did go wrong? Why did every relationship I'd been in eventually fizzle out, leaving both parties vaguely disappointed but not devastated? "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think maybe I never let people get close enough to really know me. Keep things surface level, friendly, but not intimate. Eventually, they get tired of it and move on." "Why do you think you do that? Self-preservation, maybe?" "If they don't really know you, they can't reject the real you." He nodded, understanding. "Safe, but lonely." Exactly. I know something about that. He drained pasta into a colander, the steam fogging up the window above the sink. After my divorce, I went through a period of keeping everyone at arm's length. Easier than risking getting hurt again. What changed? I realized I was protecting myself right into complete isolation. Safe, yes, but also completely cut off from any possibility of genuine connection. He plated the food with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. "Shall we sit?" We moved to his small dining table, and I was struck again by how different his approach to living was from mine. He'd set actual place settings, cloth napkins, real plates, the kind of care that suggested he took pleasure in simple rituals. When was the last time I'd eaten a meal at my own dining table instead of standing at the kitchen counter or sitting on the couch with a plate in my lap? "This looks amazing," I said, meaning it. The pasta was perfectly al dente, tossed with what looked like a homemade sauce full of fresh herbs and vegetables. "It's nothing fancy, just comfort food." But it was fancy, in the way that homemade food prepared with care always is. Each bite was complex, layered with flavors that spoke of someone who knew how to cook, not just for sustenance, but for pleasure. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Trial and error, mostly." After the divorce, I had to learn to take care of myself in ways I'd neglected during the marriage. Cooking, keeping house, creating routines that were mine instead of ours. He twirled pasta around his fork with practiced ease. It became a form of meditation, I guess, a way of being present in my own life. I mostly live on takeout and frozen meals, I admitted. I keep meaning to learn to cook properly, but it's easier to avoid the effort. But it seems pointless to put effort into cooking for one person. He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. You know what I realized? Taking care of yourself, really taking care of yourself, isn't about whether anyone else will appreciate it. It's about deciding you're worth the effort. The observation hit me with unexpected force. When had I stopped believing I was worth the effort? When had I started treating my own life as something to endure rather than something to actively create and enjoy? I never thought about it that way, I said quietly. Most people don't. We are taught that self-care is selfish, that putting energy into our own lives is somehow narcissistic. But how can you give anything meaningful to other people if you haven't first learned to value yourself? We ate in comfortable silence for a while, and I found myself studying his face in the candlelight he'd lit without fanfare. There was something deeply attractive about his thoughtfulness, the way he approached even simple things with intention and care. This wasn't just dinner, it was an experience, a moment of connection in lives that probably contained too few of them. Can I ask you something? I said eventually. Anything. This morning, in the laundry room, when you said you'd noticed me around the building, what did you mean? He set down his fork and considered the question. I meant I'd been curious about you. You seemed, I don't know, like there was more going on beneath the surface than you let people see. What made you think that? Little things. The way you moved through the world like you were trying not to take up too much space. The books you carried sometimes, poetry, literary fiction, things that suggested depth. The fact that you always looked slightly lost in thought, like you were living as much in your head as in the present moment. I felt exposed, as if he'd been reading my journal without my knowledge. You got all that from passing encounters in hallways? I told you, I notice things. Occupational hazard of being a social worker, I suppose. You learn to read people, to see what they're not saying as much as what they are. And what was I not saying? That you were lonely, that you wanted connection but were afraid to reach for it, that you had dreams you'd convinced yourself were impractical. He leaned forward slightly. That you were exactly the kind of person I'd want to know better if I ever worked up the courage to actually talk to you. My heart stopped. Had he really just said that? Had Anthony, this incredible, composed, thoughtful man, been wanting to know me better all this time? You wanted to know me better? I did. I do. His eyes met mine across the table, and there was no mistaking the intent in his gaze. Is that okay? It's more than okay, I whispered. Something shifted between us in that moment. A recognition of mutual interest that charged the air with possibility. We weren't just neighbors sharing a meal anymore. We were two people acknowledging an attraction that had been building through months of wordless encounters and one morning of unexpected intimacy. Dylan, he said quietly. Yeah? I'm glad your washing machine broke. The admission made me laugh despite the nervous energy thrumming through my veins. That's a first. I don't think anyone's ever been glad about my domestic disasters before. Well, this one brought you to my door. Technically, it brought you to mine, in the laundry room. Same result. We finished dinner, the conversation flowing easily between topics serious and light. He told me about his work, the challenges of navigating bureaucracy in service of vulnerable children, the small victories that made the frustrations worthwhile. I found myself telling him about my writing, the stories that lived in my head, but rarely made it to paper anymore, the way I used to lose myself in creating characters and worlds. "What kind of stories?" he asked, refilling our wine glasses. "Character studies, mostly. People at crossroads, facing decisions that will change their lives. The moments when someone realizes they have to choose between safety and authenticity." "Sounds like you're writing about yourself." "Maybe I am." "Isn't that what all fiction is, ultimately? The author working through their own questions?" "Probably. Which questions are you working through?" I took a sip of wine, considering whether it's possible to change course once you've settled into a life that doesn't fit. Whether safety is worth the cost of never really being yourself. Whether connection is worth the risk of being hurt. Heavy questions. Heavy times call for heavy questions. And what conclusions have you reached? Still working on those. We moved to his living room after dinner, settling onto his comfortable couch with fresh glasses of wine. The apartment felt even cozier in the lamplight, full of warm shadows and the lingering scent of dinner. I found myself relaxing completely for the first time in months, sinking into the soft cushions and the easy rhythm of conversation with someone who actually listened to my answers. "Can I tell you something?" Anthony said, turning to face me more fully. "Of course. This is the first time in years I've cooked for someone who wasn't family. The first time I've had a real conversation over dinner." "What do you mean?" "I mean I'd forgotten how good it feels to connect with someone new, to discover shared interests and different perspectives. To feel like someone is genuinely interested in what you have to say." "You seemed so confident, so self-contained. I assumed you had a rich social life." "I have colleagues, acquaintances, people I see regularly who know the public version of me. But actual friends? People I can be myself with? That's been harder to come by." The admission created a new layer of intimacy between us. Here was this man I'd admired from afar for his apparent composure and self-assurance, confessing to the same kind of loneliness that plagued my own days. "I know exactly what you mean," I said quietly. "Do you?" "I have coworkers I'm friendly with, neighbors I exchange pleasantries with, family I talk to out of obligation. But people who really know me, people I can be completely honest with?" I shook my head. I can't remember the last time I had a conversation like this. "Like what?" "Where I felt like someone was actually seeing me. Not just the surface version I present to the world, but the actual me underneath." He studied my face with those perceptive eyes. "What's the difference between the surface version and the actual you?" "The surface version has everything figured out. He's responsible, practical, content with his stable job and quiet life. He doesn't have unrealistic dreams or complicated feelings about things that should be simple." "And the actual you?" "The actual me is lost most of the time, wondering if this is all there is, if I'm going to spend the rest of my life going through the motions of a life that doesn't feel like mine. The actual me still wants to write novels and travel to places I've only read about and have conversations that last until 3 in the morning because the connection is too good to end." The actual you sounds much more interesting than the surface version. The actual me is also much more complicated, messier, harder to be around. Says who? The question caught me off guard. I don't know, everyone, society, past relationships that ended because I was too intense or too needy or too much work. Or maybe they ended because you were with people who weren't capable of appreciating complexity. Who wanted easy rather than authentic. I stared at him, struck by the possibility that my relationship failures weren't necessarily evidence of my inadequacy. Maybe they were evidence of incompatibility, of trying to fit myself into spaces that weren't designed for who I actually was. I never thought about it that way. Most people don't. We're conditioned to believe that if relationships don't work out, it's because we're somehow flawed. But what if it's just because we haven't found the right people yet? People who want the actual us instead of the simplified version. Is that what you're looking for? Someone who wants the actual you. I'm not sure I know what I'm looking for anymore, he said honestly. After my divorce, I thought I wanted to be alone. Safer that way, less risk of disappointment or hurt. But lately, I've been wondering if safe is just another word for half alive. The words hung between us, loaded with meaning. We were sitting closer now than we had been at the start of the evening, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell his cologne mixed with wine and the lingering scent of dinner. "Anthony," I said quietly. "Yeah?" I wanted to tell him how this evening had affected me, how he'd made me feel more like myself than I had in years, how the way he looked at me, really looked at me, made me want to be worthy of his attention. But the words felt too big, too loaded with implications I wasn't sure either of us was ready for. "Thank you," I said instead. "For dinner, for the conversation, for this. Thank you for accepting the invitation, for being here." We fell into comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with words. The wine and the warmth of his apartment had made me drowsy, and I found my eyelids getting heavy. I should go home, I thought distantly. It was getting late and we both had work in the morning, but I couldn't make myself move. This couch, this apartment, this man, it all felt too good to leave. Like I'd found something I'd been unconsciously searching for without knowing what it was. Dylan? I know this might be presumptuous, but would you like to have dinner again sometime? Maybe go out properly, not just leftovers in my apartment. My eyes flew open, any trace of drowsiness vanishing. Are you asking me on a date? I'm asking if you'd like to spend more time together. Whether that's a date or just two neighbors getting to know each other better, that's up to you. The careful way he phrased it gave me an out if I needed one, but also made his interest clear. This wasn't just friendliness or loneliness. He was attracted to me the same way I was attracted to him. "I'd like that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Very much." "Good." His smile was warm, relieved. "I was hoping you'd say that." I glanced at the clock on his bookshelf and was shocked to see it was nearly 11. We'd been talking for hours, the time passing without my awareness in the way it does when you're completely absorbed in another person's company. "I should probably head home," I said reluctantly. "Let you get some sleep." "Should you?" He made no move to get up from the couch, no gesture toward ending the evening. "We both have work tomorrow." "We do," but neither of us moved. We stayed there, looking at each other in the lamplight, both seeming to acknowledge that ending this evening would mean returning to our separate lives, our separate loneliness, the careful distance we'd maintained for months. "I don't want to go," I admitted quietly. "Then don't." "Anthony." I know it's complicated. I know we just met properly today. I know there's an age difference. I know a dozen reasons why this might not be wise. But I haven't felt this connected to anyone in years. And if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling right now..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I did feel it, the spark, the recognition, the sense that something significant was happening between us. "I do feel it," I whispered. We were very close now, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the slight nervous flutter of his pulse at his throat. Close enough that when he reached up to brush a strand of hair away from my face, the touch sent electricity shooting through my entire nervous system. "Dylan," he said, my name like a question on his lips. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes at the simple pleasure of being handled with such gentleness. When was the last time someone had touched me like that? Not with urgency or desire, but with tenderness, as if I were something precious. When I opened my eyes, his face was inches from mine, his expression soft and questioning, asking permission, giving me space to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't want to pull away. I wanted to close the distance between us, to discover what it would feel like to kiss this man who had already seen more of my authentic self than anyone had in years. My lonely older neighbor changed my life forever. Gay Story, Part 2. The words hung in the air between us like suspended raindrops, each syllable carrying more weight than it should have. You don't have to go yet, if you don't want to. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it might as well have been a shout in the cathedral silence of his living room. I stood frozen in his doorway, my hand still gripping the cold brass handle, feeling the November wind slip through the crack and brush against my neck like phantom fingers. The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the windows with an urgency that seemed to mirror my own heartbeat. I could smell it in the air, that clean electric scent that comes just before a storm truly breaks. The word caught in my throat like a fishbone. I turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw something in his eyes that made my chest tighten. Vulnerability, raw, unguarded vulnerability that he was trying desperately to hide behind the careful architecture of his composed expression. He was still sitting on his couch, but now he'd turned his body toward me completely, his hands resting on his knees in that way people do when they're trying to appear casual but failing. The lamplight caught the silver threads in his dark hair, and I noticed for the first time how his sweater, a deep forest green that brought out the warmth in his brown eyes, hung slightly loose on his frame, as if he'd lost weight recently, as if he'd been forgetting to take care of himself. The storm's getting worse, he added quietly, gesturing toward the window where lightning had begun to flicker in the distance. It might be dangerous to drive. We both knew it was an excuse. The roads weren't that bad yet, and my apartment was only 15 minutes away. But excuses are sometimes the gentlest way to offer what we're too afraid to ask for directly. I let go of the door handle. The soft click as it settled back into place seemed to echo through the room with finality, like the closing of one chapter and the tentative opening of another. Okay, I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. I'll stay a little longer. The relief that washed over his face was so profound that it made something twist painfully in my chest. How long had it been since someone had chosen to stay with him? How many evenings had he spent alone in this beautiful, empty house, listening to the silence grow thicker with each passing hour? I walked back toward the couch, but instead of sitting where I'd been before, I found myself gravitating toward the opposite end, close enough to feel his presence but far enough away to maintain the illusion of casual friendship. The leather cushions creaked softly as I settled in, and I became hyper-aware of every small sound. The whisper of fabric against fabric as I adjusted my position, the quiet rhythm of our breathing, the distant rumble of thunder that seemed to be growing closer. Would you like some tea? He asked, already starting to rise from his seat. Or coffee? I think I have some wine somewhere. Tea sounds perfect, I said quickly, grateful for something to fill the space between us. Thank you. He nodded and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone with the weight of my decision and the growing realization of what staying might mean. I could hear him moving around, the soft clink of china, the whistle of the kettle, the gentle rattle of spoons in a drawer. Domestic sounds that painted pictures in my mind of what his evenings usually looked like. Did he always make tea for one? Did he eat dinner standing at the counter, too tired or too lonely to bother with the formality of the dining table? When he returned, carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs and a small plate of cookies that looked homemade, I noticed his hands had the slightest tremor. Nerves, maybe, or just the natural consequence of years spent holding up the world's expectations. I hope Earl Grey is all right, he said, setting the tray down on the coffee table between us. It's all I had. It's perfect, I assured him, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic and letting the bergamot-scented steam rise between us like incense. Thank you. We drank in silence for a while, and I found myself studying his profile as he stared out at the storm. The lines around his eyes spoke of laughter and worry in equal measure, and there was something achingly beautiful about the way the lamplight cast shadows along the strong line of his jaw. He held his mug with both hands, as if drawing comfort from its warmth, and I noticed that his fingers were long and elegant, the kind that belonged to someone who had once played piano or painted watercolors or written letters in flowing script. "I used to love storms," he said suddenly, his voice soft and contemplative. "When I was younger, I would sit by my bedroom window and watch the lightning, trying to count the seconds between the flash and the thunder to see how close it was getting." "What changed?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. He was quiet for a long moment, rolling the mug between his palms. "I suppose storms are more frightening when you're experiencing them alone." The honesty in his words hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance between us and offer some small comfort, but I didn't know if I was allowed. We were still strangers, really, despite the odd intimacy that had developed between us over these past few hours. Still, there was something about the way he'd said it, not looking for pity, just stating a simple, devastating truth, that made my heart clench with recognition. "I know that feeling," I said quietly. "The being alone part." He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I felt exposed under his gentle scrutiny. "Do you? You seem like someone who would have lots of friends, lots of people around you." I let out a laugh that held no humor. Having people around and not feeling alone are two very different things. "Yes," he said simply. "They are." Another stretch of silence settled between us, but this time it felt different, less awkward, more companionable. Like we were two people who had found themselves in the same boat and were finally acknowledging that we were floating in the same vast ocean. The storm outside was building in earnest now, and with each flash of lightning, the room would be briefly illuminated in stark black and white before returning to the warm golden glow of the lamps. During one particularly bright flash, I caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and longing, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he wasn't sure he was allowed to work on. "Can I ask you something?" he said, setting his mug down on the coffee table and turning his body more fully toward me. "Of course." "What are you running from?" The question caught me completely off guard. I opened my mouth to protest, to ask what he meant, but the words died before they could form. Because somehow, inexplicably, he had seen right through me. Seen past the careful small talk and polite distance to the truth I'd been trying to hide from myself. I started, then stopped. How could I explain it? How could I tell him about the crushing weight of expectations, about the life I was supposed to want but didn't, about the growing certainty that I was living someone else's dream, while my own remained buried so deep I'd almost forgotten what it looked like? "I'm sorry," he said quickly, seeing my struggle. "That was too personal. I shouldn't have—" "No," I interrupted, surprising myself. "It's okay. I don't know how to put it into words." He waited, patient and still, like someone who had learned the value of silence. Outside, the wind picked up, sending tree branches scratching against the windows with desperate fingers. "I feel like I'm sleepwalking," I said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "Like I'm going through all the motions of living, work, friends, dating, all of it. But none of it feels real. None of it feels like mine, if that makes sense." He nodded slowly. "It makes perfect sense." "Does it?" I laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Because I feel crazy most of the time. Like I'm the only person in the world who looks around and thinks, is this it? Is this really all there is?" "You're not crazy," he said, and the certainty in his voice made something tight in my chest begin to loosen. "And you're definitely not the only one." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw my own lost expression reflected back at me. You feel it too. It wasn't a question. Every day, he admitted. The sleepwalking. The sense that life is happening to someone else while I watch from the sidelines. How do you stand it? The question came out more desperate than I'd intended, but I couldn't take it back now. He was quiet for a long time, staring down at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible above the storm. Most days, I don't know. I get up, I go through the motions, I tell myself that this is what adult life is supposed to feel like, that everyone else has figured out some secret I'm still missing. But some days... He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw something that made my breath catch. Hope. Fragile and flickering, but unmistakably there. Some days, something unexpected happens. Someone new moves in next door, or a stranger asks for help with groceries, and suddenly the world feels possible again. The weight of his words settled between us like a living thing. I felt my heart begin to race as I realized what he was really saying, what we were both dancing around with our careful metaphors and safe distances. David, I said softly, using his name for the first time that evening. It felt strange on my tongue, intimate in a way that made me blush. Yes? I'm glad I stayed. Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to something warmer, more vulnerable. I'm glad you stayed too, Marcus. Hearing him say my name sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the storm outside. The way he said it, soft and careful, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth, made me acutely aware of the space between us on the couch. It suddenly seemed both too far and not nearly far enough. The lights flickered as a particularly strong gust of wind rattled the house, and in that moment of uncertainty, I found myself shifting closer to him without conscious thought. Not touching, but close enough that I could smell his cologne, something warm and woody that made me want to lean in further. The power might go out, he said, but he made no move to get candles or flashlights. Instead, he was looking at me with an intensity that made my skin tingle. Would that be so bad? I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. No, he said quietly. I don't think it would be. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, and in that brief moment of stark clarity, I saw him as if for the first time. Not as my neighbor, not as some mysterious older man, but as David. Just David. Lonely and hoping and beautiful in his quiet way, sitting close enough to touch but still somehow unreachable. When the darkness returned, it seemed deeper than before, more intimate. The storm was directly overhead now, and each crack of thunder made us both startle slightly, then laugh at our own jumpiness. But I noticed that with each startling moment, we seemed to drift closer together, like ships seeking shelter in the same harbor. I should probably check the windows, he said, but he made no move to get up. Make sure they're all latched properly. Probably, I agreed, also not moving. We sat there in our mutual inertia, both of us aware that checking the windows was just another excuse, another way to avoid acknowledging what was really happening between us. The air in the room felt charged, electric in a way that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Marcus. His voice was so soft I almost missed it over the rain. Yeah? Do you ever wonder if... He stopped, frustrated with his own inability to find the words. I turned to face him fully, drawing one leg up onto the couch so I could look at him properly. Do I ever wonder if what? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words came out in a rush, as if he had to say them quickly or lose his nerve entirely. If there's something wrong with me, for feeling the way I do, for wanting. He gestured vaguely between us, his cheeks flushing even in the dim light. My heart stopped, then started again at double time. What do you want, David? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities and fraught with the potential for everything to change. I watched as he struggled with his answer, his hands clasping and unclasping in his lap, his eyes searching my face for some sign of how I might react. "I want to not feel alone anymore," he said finally. "I want to matter to someone. I want to stop pretending that I'm something I'm not." The raw honesty in his voice nearly undid me. Without thinking, I reached out and covered one of his restless hands with mine. The contact was electric, the first time we'd truly touched, and I felt him go very still beneath my palm. "There's nothing wrong with you," I said firmly. "Nothing at all." He stared down at our joined hands as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. "I'm 42 years old, Marcus. I should have figured this out by now. I should know who I am and what I want and how to—" "Stop," I said gently, squeezing his hand. "Just stop. You don't have to have everything figured out. Nobody does, no matter how old they are." "Don't I?" He looked up at me, and I saw decades of self-doubt and carefully buried dreams in his eyes. Because sometimes I feel like I've wasted so much time trying to be what everyone else expected me to be that I've forgotten who I actually am underneath it all. I understood that feeling so completely, it made my chest ache. Then maybe it's time to start figuring it out. The real you, I mean. What if the real me is someone people can't accept? The question was whispered, vulnerable, and I realized we were no longer talking in generalities. We were talking about us, about this moment, about the way he was looking at me like I might be the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. "Then those people don't deserve you," I said, my voice barely audible above the storm. Something in his expression cracked open then, like a dam finally giving way after years of pressure. His free hand came up to touch my cheek, hesitant at first, then more sure when I didn't pull away. "You're so young," he murmured, but there was no rejection in his voice. If anything, he sounded awed, as if he couldn't quite believe I was real. "I'm 26, David. I'm not a child." "I know," he said. "I know that. It's just, I never imagined. I never let myself imagine." "What?" I prompted gently, leaning slightly into his touch. "That someone like you would ever look at someone like me and see something worth wanting." The pain in his voice made my heart break a little. How long had he been telling himself that story? How many years had he spent believing that he wasn't worth loving, wasn't worth choosing? "I do," I said simply. "I do see something worth wanting." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, and I felt him tremble slightly. "Marcus." "It's okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was reassuring him about. The situation, the feelings that were building between us, the way the world seemed to have narrowed down to just this moment, just the two of us and the storm outside. "Is it?" he asked. "Because I don't know the rules here. I don't know how this works or what I'm supposed to do or—" I silenced him by covering his hand with mine, pressing his palm more firmly against my cheek. "There are no rules. There's just us right now, in this moment. That's all we need to worry about." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine as if looking for some sign that this was real, that he wasn't dreaming. Then, slowly, carefully, as if he were afraid I might disappear at any sudden movement, he leaned closer. The first brush of his lips against mine was feather-light, tentative, more of a question than a statement. I could taste the Earl Grey tea on his breath, could feel the slight roughness of his stubble against my skin. When I didn't pull away, when I instead leaned into the kiss and let my eyes fall closed, I felt him exhale against my mouth like he'd been holding his breath for years. The second kiss was deeper, more sure. His hand slid from my cheek to the back of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair as he pulled me closer. I went willingly, my own hands finding the soft wool of his sweater and fisting in the fabric as if anchoring myself to this moment, to him. It was everything I'd imagined and nothing like I'd expected all at once. There was desperation in the way he kissed me. Decades of loneliness and want poured into this single connection. But there was also reverence, as if he were handling something precious and fragile that might break if he held on too tightly. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine and closed his eyes. "I can't believe this is happening," he whispered. "Are you okay with it happening?" I asked, suddenly needing the reassurance. His eyes opened, meeting mine, and what I saw there made my heart skip a beat. Wonder, joy, and underneath it all, a bone-deep contentment that I recognized because I felt it too. "More than okay," he said. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel awake." I knew exactly what he meant. The sleepwalking feeling we'd talked about earlier seemed to have evaporated completely, leaving behind a hyper-awareness of everything. The storm outside, the warmth of his skin, the way his sweater had ridden up slightly to reveal a strip of stomach that made my mouth go dry, the sound of our breathing in the quiet room. "Come here," he said softly, tugging gently on my hand. I let him pull me closer until I was half curled against his side, my head resting on his shoulder, and one hand splayed across his chest. I could feel his heart beating beneath my palm, fast and strong, and the steady rhythm was oddly comforting. We stayed like that for a while, neither of us speaking, just breathing together and listening to the storm. His fingers traced idle patterns on my arm, and I found myself marveling at how natural this felt, how right. Like we'd been doing this for years instead of hours. "I should probably call in sick tomorrow," he said eventually, his voice rumbling through his chest. "Why?" I asked, though I hoped I knew the answer. "Because I don't want this night to end. I don't want you to leave, and for this to turn into something we both pretend never happened." I tilted my head up to look at him. "Is that what you think will happen?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never done anything like this before." "What, stayed up late during a storm?" That earned me a small laugh. "You know what I mean?" I did know. I knew he was talking about the kissing, the touching, the way we were curled together on his couch like lovers instead of neighbors who'd only just met. I knew he was talking about the terrifying, exhilarating step we'd just taken into uncharted territory. "I've never done this either," I told him. "Not really. Not like this." "No?" I shook my head. "I've been with people before, but never someone who mattered. Never someone I actually wanted to stay with afterward." His arm tightened around me slightly. "And you want to stay with me?" "I want to stay with you," I confirmed, surprised by how certain I sounded. "If you'll have me." "Marcus." He said my name like a prayer, like something sacred and precious. "Of course I'll have you. The question is whether you'll still want to be had when the morning comes and you remember that I'm just your sad, lonely neighbor who doesn't know what he's doing." I pushed up on my elbow so I could look him in the eye properly. "Stop that. Stop talking about yourself like you're pathetic or unworthy or whatever story you've been telling yourself. You're not sad and lonely because there's something wrong with you. You're sad and lonely because you've been pretending to be someone you're not for so long that you forgot how to let people see the real you." "And who is the real me?" he asked quietly. I studied his face, the gentle eyes, the laugh lines, the mouth that had kissed me with such careful reverence. "You're kind. You're thoughtful. You make beautiful spaces, and you worry about your neighbors, and you've been taking care of everyone else for so long that you've forgotten to take care of yourself. You're intelligent and funny, and you have this way of listening that makes people feel heard. You're scared and brave and beautiful, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you." His eyes grew bright, and for a moment I thought he might cry. Instead, he cupped my face in both hands and kissed me again, slower this time, deeper, like he was trying to memorize the taste of me. When we broke apart, he pressed his lips to my forehead and held me there. "I never thought," he whispered against my skin, "that someone would see me like that." Well, I do. And I'm not going anywhere. Even when the storm ends? I considered this, listening to the rain that seemed to have settled into a steady rhythm against the windows. The thunder was more distant now, but still rumbling, and I realized I didn't want it to stop. I didn't want this night to end, didn't want to return to the world outside where everything was complicated and uncertain. "Especially when the storm ends," I said. We settled back into our embrace, and I felt his breathing begin to even out as the adrenaline of our confessions and kisses gave way to a bone-deep contentment. The couch wasn't big enough for both of us to lie down properly, but somehow we made it work, with me curled against his side and his arm around me, a throw blanket pulled over both of us. "Thank you," he said quietly into the darkness. "For what?" "For staying, for seeing me, for making me feel like I'm not invisible anymore." I pressed a kiss to his collarbone through his sweater. "Thank you for asking me to stay." I almost didn't. I was terrified you'd say no. I almost did say no. I was terrified you were just being polite. We both laughed softly at the absurdity of it, two people so afraid of rejection that we'd nearly missed this entirely. "I'm glad we're both terrible at reading social cues," he murmured, his fingers combing through my hair. I agreed, already feeling drowsy from the warmth of his body and the steady sound of his heartbeat. "Me too." Outside, the storm was beginning to move on, the thunder growing more distant and the rain gentling to a soft patter against the glass. But inside, in the cocoon of warmth and safety we'd created on his couch, time seemed suspended. We were drifting in that peaceful space between waking and sleeping, where everything felt possible and nothing had to be decided right now. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I was aware of was the soft gray light of dawn filtering through the windows and the sound of birds beginning to sing in the aftermath of the storm. David was still asleep beneath me, his breathing deep and even, his arm still wrapped protectively around me. For a moment I just lay there and listened to him breathe, marveling at how different everything felt in the morning light. I'd expected to wake up with regrets, with second thoughts and awkward explanations. Instead, I felt peaceful, content in a way I hadn't experienced in years. David stirred slightly, his arm tightening around me before his eyes fluttered open. When he saw me looking at him, a slow smile spread across his face that was so beautiful it made my chest ache. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," I replied. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," he admitted. "You?" "The same." We stayed like that for a while, just looking at each other in the soft morning light, both of us seeming to realize that we'd crossed a line in the darkness that there was no going back over. The question now was where we went from here. "Marcus?" David said eventually. "Yeah?" "I know this is all new, and I know it's complicated, and I don't want to pressure you or make you feel like you owe me anything because of what happened last night." "But," I prompted when he trailed off. "But I was wondering if maybe, would you like to have breakfast with me? I make pretty decent pancakes and I have real maple syrup and I'm not ready for this to end yet." The hope in his voice, carefully tempered by the fear of rejection, made my heart turn over in my chest. "I would love to have breakfast with you," I said, and watched as relief and joy transformed his entire expression. "Really?" "Really. But I should probably call my work first. Let them know I won't be in today." "Are you sure? I don't want you to get in trouble because of me." I shifted up so I could kiss him properly, morning breath and all. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As I reached for my phone to make the call, I caught sight of the world outside his living room windows. The storm had washed everything clean, leaving behind a landscape that sparkled with raindrops and possibility. The sun was breaking through the clouds, painting everything in shades of gold and hope. It felt like a metaphor for something. For us, maybe. For the way we'd weathered our own storm together and come out the other side changed. Cleaner, more ourselves than we'd been before. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how we'd navigate this thing between us, or what it would look like in the bright light of day, or whether we'd be able to build something real and lasting from the fragile foundation we'd laid in the darkness. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was excited to find out. The future stretched ahead of us, uncertain and full of questions, but no longer empty, no longer something to be endured. For the first time in years, it felt like something to be lived. And as David smiled at me in the golden morning light, his hair mussed from sleep and his eyes bright with possibility, I realized that this was what hope felt like. This warm, fluttering thing in my chest that whispered maybe, just maybe, the best parts of my life were still ahead of me. The rain had stopped, but the story was just beginning.